Eyes wide open. Where the streets whisper old blood tales and the legends refuse to die. If you think the stories are just myths, think again. Now let's take a look.
Night shift is all fun and games. It's no management. It's good vibes. Until your dementia patient starts talking about the person they're seeing in their room. And they're a little bit too insistent on the person that they're seeing in their room. And then the other nurse that you're working with is like, listen, that empty room, I just watched someone get out of the bed and walk to the bathroom. And you're like, what? And then you go back to the side of the unit that you're sitting on by yourself. And there's no one over there, and no noise, and no one walking around, except for the paranormal activity.
I used to work at a nursing home, and it was built on top of a graveyard, mind you. You know where this is going. If you're not into paranormal activities, just go, please, please. I went into that job so fearlessly because I didn't think that the stuff was real. Patients who passed away, they had the story that they would talk about, and every single patient would talk about the same thing before they would pass away. I'm not saying that we depended on the story to come out for us to determine that this patient's going to pass away within a week, but we did prepare. Because when we would hear them talking about it during lunchtime, during meals, they would sit down together, these residents, and they would talk about it. And we would know it's coming. It's coming. And it happened with every single patient. For the 3.5 years that I worked, every single patient that passed away would talk about these two twins. Now hold on. That's not the end. There was this one particular resident that would see these twins and she would talk to them all the time. We had a section for her in the nursing home for her to wake up. She would not sleep. She would be up all night, and I worked night shifts, mind you. So we had a space for her designated just for her to hang out with the twins. This isn't someone who would make these things up for attention. She full on dementia. Where I would sit in the nurse's station, I could see that table, that accent chair, the residents sitting there and having full-on conversations. And every single time I was fixated on that conversation, looking at them, she would pause in silence and slowly turn her head and look at me until I looked away. It's almost as if those twins are like, she's paying attention. She's paying attention. Y'all.
If you're wondering if there's life after death, absolutely. So I used to be a hospice nurse, and I worked the night shift, 7P to 7A. That night I had a husband and a wife as patients. They were both in isolation rooms. Each one had their own room because each one had different infectious diseases. So I go in to check on the female, and I'm talking to her, and I notice her vitals are, going down. So I was talking to her, and she said, I'm in pain. I said, do you want me to give you something for pain? And she said, yes. And on my way out, she said, hey, thank you for everything that you're doing. And I said, no problem. So I go up to the nurse's station. I tell them, hey, you might want to contact the family because she's, declining. And they said also the husband, he's showing irregular heartbeats. And I said, okay. They were both DNRs, which means do not resuscitate. So if something happens to them, we have to let them pass. So I walk all the way back to the med cart. I'm getting her medication ready. All of a sudden, she's standing next to me. And I told her, what are you doing here, Mrs. So-and-so? And she says, I need for you to go check on my husband right now. And I said, okay, I'll do that. Let me medicate you first. She said, no, I need to see him, but I can't unless I'm with you. And I looked at her and I said, well, okay. So we go into his isolation room, and there's a little room that you go into before you go into the actual patient's room because you have to get, dressed medically. So we walked into the patient's room, and she's standing next to me the whole time, and I'm feeling like this electricity, and my skin is just, the hair is rising up, and, he looks at her and he goes, I'm so glad you came, honey. She said, grab my hand, and she said, come on, let's go. And I said, what do you mean, let's go? Where are you going? So he sits up. Next thing I know, they're grabbing hands. All of a sudden he falls back into the bed, and I turn to look, and she's gone. And so then I get a knock on the door, and they're like, hey, he just passed, and also the wife just passed. And I'm sitting there going, okay. So I go back to the wife's room, and, she's expired. And I'm like, this is really, really bizarre. And I didn't say anything. So we decided that we were going to put them together so that when the family came in, they could say their proper goodbyes. So we put them together in the room. And as I'm doing that, I'm in there by myself. the female just shows up out of the blue. And at this point, I already know that this is something paranormal. And she said, he won't come with me. And I'm like, what do you mean he won't come with you? And she's like, no, he won't come with me. At that point, the kids walk in and they start crying, and I'm backing up against the wall because, I don't want to get in the way. So then as I'm walking out of the room, the bathroom door starts to open and I see the man standing there. And he's still wearing his hospital gown, and he looks out, through the door, and he says, okay, they're here. I can go now. And I hear the wife laughing in the background, and then the bathroom kind of lit up, and then they were gone. That just blew my mind. This couple was kept separate from each other because they were in isolation, doctor's orders. I can't just put them together because that's not what the doctor ordered. We worked at a facility where people that were on hospice would come in and we would stabilize them from something they had, and then they would be sent home. When she came out of the room and was standing next to me, I didn't know that she had already passed. I thought, this was literally her. And I was telling her, ma'am, you can't come in there with me. You can't be out of your room. But she was so adamant, that she wanted to see her husband. So I allowed her. I figured, you know what? She's declining already. This is what she wants. I'm going to go ahead and let her. So when we went into the room, she went in there with me. I said, I'm probably going to get in trouble, but so be it. You guys, this was back in the year 2000. We didn't have cameras or cell phones. And even if we did have cell phones, we weren't allowed to record. And this happened in a matter of minutes. I wasn't aware that she had passed because I thought she was literally with me. When I went into the husband's room with her, this all happened in a matter of minutes. My charge nurse went to check on the lady because the monitor showed that her heart rate had stopped. So when my charge nurse was in there, I was already in the husband's room. So I didn't know that she had passed. I came to figure that out soon after I experienced what I did. So when the family came and they were with the family members, I walked out of the room and I was documenting because back then we were still documenting on paper. Again, this was the year 2000. And the daughter came out and shared a story with me. She said she was at home. And she walked into the living room and she saw her mother sitting on the couch and she said, Mom, what are you doing here? You're supposed to be in the hospital. And that the mother said, hi, baby. And shortly thereafter, she just disappeared. And she said, next thing you know, Patty, she said, I'm getting a call that my family, my mom had passed and my dad had passed. So when she told me that, I felt comfortable enough to share my experience with her. And it made her cry and it made me cry. But, she shared it with the rest of her family and it made them feel better that, they were together. And it's an experience that I'll never forget.
When I was a trauma nurse, there was a terrible accident involving two young men who were leaving a baseball game. They were involved in a very terrible accident. The driver was killed, passed away on scene, and we received the passenger. I'm changing the names. His name was Scott. Scott's injuries were pretty extensive, and we did everything we could for him. His entire family was in the waiting room, but he went to cardiac arrest 3 times. We brought him back 3 times, but then unfortunately, he passed away. Man, it was so sad. His family came in. They were so distraught and so upset. They said their final goodbyes, and we had Scott's baseball jersey folded up near the bedside. I gave that to the parents. The dad pulled me aside, and he handed me a baseball glove, and he said, would you please do me a favor? This is Scott's baseball glove. Would you please make sure that it stays with him when you bring him down to the morgue for when the funeral home picks him up? I promised him I would, but I got really busy getting everything ready, and I had to take Scott's body down to the morgue. I brought his body down to the morgue, and as I was bringing him in there, I realized I totally forgot the baseball glove. I told the gentleman in the morgue, I'll be right back, and I turned around to walk out of the morgue, and there was a young man standing in the hallway staring at me. I will never forget what he looked like. He was a really good-looking young man, light brown eyes, wearing a baseball uniform, and he was holding Scott's baseball glove. He said, hey, man, you forgot this. I said, oh, my goodness, I'm so sorry. Thank you so much for bringing this. What's your name? And he said, hi, I'm Manny. I said, Manny, I'm so sorry for your loss. And he smiled, and he said, no, that's okay. And he turned around and walked away. My shift was coming to an end, but I made sure to go up to the waiting room to say my goodbyes to the family, and I thanked the dad for sending Manny downstairs with the baseball glove. As soon as I said the name Manny, the entire waiting room became quiet. This other couple stood up and walked over to me, and the gentleman said, did you just say Manny brought you down the baseball glove? I said, yeah. Him and his wife looked at each other and they started crying. The wife opened up her purse. She pulled out a picture and she said, is this Manny? And I said, yeah, that's him. Everyone got even quieter. And I said, what's going on? They said, Manny's our son and he was in the accident with Scott. He was the driver. He died on scene. I was in shock. I'm telling you, the guy in the picture was the guy who was downstairs with the baseball glove. After a while, we all hugged and said our goodbyes. And all I could think to myself was when I said to Manny, I'm sorry for your loss, he smiled and seemed so peaceful. If it didn't happen to me, I wouldn't believe it.
So I started seeing a patient who was able to live independently in his own home. When I first started seeing him, he lived there by himself and he was managing okay. He would occasionally ask whenever I was there doing my visits for me to go get something from the kitchen or get something from another room in the house. And I always did whatever was asked. There was one room in particular that the door was always closed. And I didn't really think a lot about it because sometimes you just have a room you don't want people to go into. The house, as I understood it, was inherited from his family. So it had been passed, it was an old house. It had been passed down through several generations of his family, and he just was the one that was living in it currently. I would notice some things that I thought was strange occasionally. There were stairs, an upstairs portion of the house, but he was not able to go up and down stairs, so he stayed downstairs all the time. And sometimes I'd go and windows would be open, and sometimes they'd be closed. And so I'd ask, do I need to go close windows or open windows or, depending on the temperature. And he, yes, no, whatever. And so I did that. But as his condition started to decline, I had to get in touch with his daughter, who would be his caregiver, to let her know that we needed to start doing some planning because I wasn't sure how much longer he was going to be able to stay by himself. At that point, she told me we're going to have a problem because she was not coming to that house. It was not going to happen, that she could not stay there, but that he would not leave there. And so this was going to be a problem. So I got back and talked to him and kind of say, what is happening? And he explains, the house has been in my family for generations. There's some unusual things here that scared my family away, and they don't like to come back here to stay, but I can't go anywhere else. I'm not leaving this place. So, okay. Things like what? And I didn't get not a lot of, he didn't tell me nothing, so I don't know. But as his condition started to get worse, we started seeing things while we were there. So, typically I would visit a couple times a month for maybe an hour, so I'm not there all the time to see what's going on. But when I would be there, I would notice that there were sounds coming from the room where the door was closed, like things were falling off the walls, things were being knocked over, that kind of thing. And so I asked at some point if he had a rodent problem or something like that, because we could take care of that. And he said, no, not much else. And then, excuse me, as we kind of rocked along, some things started happening in the room while we were there. He was sleeping in the living room at this point, and things would fall off the walls. In the kitchen, we would watch things move around the counter occasionally, and things come off the walls. Things go from one side of the room to the other. The thing in particular, this is very weird. So this was back in the day. He had his television was stacked on his cable box. You know how he used to do that, stacked on a VCR or whatever. But it was stacked underneath the TV. That cable box did not want to be where it was, and it would come out from under the TV and fly across the room and hit the other wall. Saw it happen many times. His daughter did eventually come and stay with him. I don't know if I ever said that, because she wanted to be there with him. She was petrified. And I mean, nobody was particularly thrilled. And when we would talk to him about, do you have any idea what's going on? He would just say no. Like, I assume it's something that he had lived with for years and years, because he did never act like he was terribly surprised. That daggone cable box, though, was the worst thing, because it honestly was dangerous. Like, you would be sitting on the sofa having a conversation with this man in the bed, and this cable box would go flying over top of him and hit the wall, whatever. Went through a lot of cable boxes. So eventually I asked about bringing the chaplain out. Maybe that would be helpful. And he was kind of open to that, but he wasn't a particularly religious person. And a lot of times we used our chaplains for manpower. If there were things in the house that needed to be done. And so really what I wanted him to do was come in and screw down the cable box underneath the TV. So at least that thing would stay in place while other things were kind of moving around. And so he did. He went out with me to make a joint visit one day. And I'm not a mechanic, but he put bolts, dryer. I don't know what those are. The thing that you stick this in and then you screw this up to it and it holds it in place. He put that in the cable box through the shelf that it was sitting on and then put the TV back on top of it. And so, cool, we think we've got it all settled or whatever. This man did not want chaplain services other than to provide manpower. But we got that done. And so I thought, okay, maybe at least that will be okay. And then towards the end of his life, I believe it was maybe a day or two before he passed, the chaplain went out with me again. We knew that he had declined to that point, that he only had days left probably. When we got to the house, it was insanity. We could hear things moving around upstairs. Windows were opening and closing. And when we got inside the house, things were moving constantly in the house. I'm not even kidding. Just bear with me on this. And then things kind of settled and got quiet for a moment while we were talking. And his daughter was there, still petrified, but taking good care of him and doing the best she could. But all of a sudden, there was kind of a break in the conversation, and it was quiet. And we heard this weird kind of squeaking noise, and I thought, what in the world? And so we all were kind of looking to see, because I'm still hoping it's rodent. I don't know. Anyway, it was coming in the direction of the cable box. So I looked and watched the washer come down from the bolt, drop to the floor, and the cable box come out from under the TV, go flying across the room and hit the other wall and go down. And the daughter went running outside. At that point, we went outside to try to provide some kind of comfort to her. And she said, I just can't wait for this all to be done. She just wanted to leave from there. And he had declined to the point that he didn't have good quality of life at that point anyway. So she stayed, obviously, until he passed away a couple of days later. And I learned after the fact that she had the house burned and buried. And I don't know if she retained the lot. I think she did for a little while, but I don't know what she did with it after that. So I don't know if there are new owners. Also don't know what that was. Yeah, that was a thing. You may have heard of that. You may have heard anything like that.
So a few years ago, I worked in this nursing home. I worked on a dementia floor, so things were pretty chaotic to begin with. If you've ever worked with dementia patients, you know what I'm talking about. This one particular day, I was working overnight, and when I arrived, I was going to each of my patients' rooms to read their report from the day. This one patient I had, she was completely bedridden. You had to lift her. She's pretty small, though, so I could always do it myself. So when I got to her room, she's laying on the floor beside her bed. And my first thought is oh my God, she fell out of bed. So I went over to her and I was like, Miss Blank, are you okay? What happened? Did you fall? And she said, oh no, honey, the man put me here. So I thought that she meant the male nurse that was there that day. So I went out to the nurse's station and I was like, why did you put her on the floor? Kind of weird. It's a little strange. And he was like, what are you talking about? And I told him, I was like, she said that a man put her on the floor. You are the only man here. And he's like, I did not put anybody on the floor. So I went back into her room, and again, she was a very tiny lady. I was able to get her up and into her bed by myself, and I finished doing what I needed to do and left the room. A few hours went by, around midnight, I was doing my rounds again just to check on everybody, and I heard her talking in her room. It's not uncommon for dementia patients to be talking to themselves, but I stopped by her door to listen to what she was saying, and I heard her say, no, I can't get out of bed again, they'll get mad. immediately just chills everywhere. So then I went around the corner to look into her room, and she is like hovering above her bed, like this much. And as soon as it's only for like 2 seconds, and as soon as I look at her, she drops down to the bed. And needless to say, that was my last shift at that nursing home. I literally never returned.
So this story still freaks me out to this day. Every time I tell it, it gives me goosebumps. I cannot believe that this happened to me and my colleague, but I figured I would share. So I was working a few years ago at a NICU as a night shift nurse here in Dallas, and we do our touch times every 3 hours, and of course around 3 a.m. I'm kind of doing my touch time. And where I was kind of down the hallway at the very end. It was in the triplet room, but where I was standing, I could see all the way down the hallway. And I'm getting the milk ready, about to put it in the warmer, and I see my friend around the corner. And she is walking to me like fast, and she looks ghostly white. Her eyes were wide, and she said, "Kendall, you need to drop what you're doing, and you need to follow me now. You have to come and see this." So I'm like, okay, well, let me put this in the warmer real quick, and then I'll follow you. So I put it in the warmer, and I start walking down the hallway around the corner. And as we're walking, she's kind of telling me what happened. And so she was, kind of to give you a layout of the land first, she was in 2 twin rooms. In each room, there was two beds with babies in them. And in between, there's a sliding glass door separating the rooms. So you could open it if there happened to be 4 babies. You could just leave it open. But hers was closed to separate the rooms. And in between each bed spot, there was a computer in between. And she had lullaby music playing on it. And she was in one room with one of the babies, and she was about to draw a lab on it. And all of a sudden, the computer screen shuts off, and she notices that the music stopped playing. And so she kind of glances up, and she's like, "Oh, that's weird." And out of the corner of her eye, in the opposite room, through the sliding glass doors, she sees on that computer something red. So she fully looks at it, and it is a red devil face, fully taking up the entirety of the screen, staring at her, and on the screen. And so she immediately drops what she's doing, and that's when she grabbed me. So I'm rounding the corner, fully expecting it not to be there still, after all the time of her coming to get me and coming back. But I round the corner, and from the hallway, I look into the room, and I also see it. So both of us are looking at this. My mouth drops wide open. I get teary-eyed. I'm basically crying because I'm so scared. And I was too afraid to go in that room. So we go into the other room that she was in originally, and I'm standing on the opposite side of the sliding glass door into that room, just staring at this face, this devil face on the screen. And I didn't know what to do. But I'm religious, so I immediately start praying out loud. I said, "Lord, please protect us. Please protect this baby. Whatever this is, it is not welcome here." And I just repeated that because I didn't know what else to do. It literally makes my eyes water because it scares the crap out of me. I couldn't make this up. And so I was repeating that for a solid minute, and somehow mustered up the courage to say, "You know what? This isn't okay. I'm going to turn it off." I take a step towards the door, and the screen shuts off. It goes black for a split second, and then all of a sudden, it goes back to playing YouTube. Playing the lullaby music that was on YouTube. And I go in there, and I scour it because I am a little bit of a skeptic, and I looked at the search history. I looked at everything that it could have possibly been, any browsers that were open, anything. I also, know that with YouTube, if it's baby lullaby music, generally the commercials that pop up are relatable. So you're going to see diaper commercials and things like that. And I mean, I was so just confused as to what that could have been. And I mean, in my mind, I'm thinking, okay, something evil is there. I was so afraid to go back to work. We obviously reported it just in case there was some sort of hacking into the system, but it's a secure system because at the end of the day, it is a hospital. They have a lot of records that they have to keep secure. But I don't know. What do you guys think? Like I said, I can't believe that this happened to me. It still freaks me out to this day, but I don't know.
Hi, I am Nurse Brown. I've been a nurse for 13 years, and I also have other things. One of them, a special little gift I didn't ask for, was I see dead people. Okay. But I want to tell this particular story to start off with because I finally had validation that I wasn't crazy. So I saw this video, and she talks about her friend in the ER, and she has this gunshot wound patient. And when she went to do his neural checks, she noticed that he would not take his eyes off this particular corner of the room. Finally, somebody confirms what I see. But if you've ever seen the movie Ghost, when he kind of when you see him at the end, when he gets unalived, you see all those shadows coming from him. I kind of always feel like it's like that when the angel of death comes for you, or whoever you want to call it. So, backstory. I was a midnight nurse, and I worked in the rehab unit, and I was also a supervisor at the time. I had this patient, and initially she came in because she had pneumonia, and she was put on some oxygen. And she also just needed rehab. She got kind of weak, needed some PTOT. Anyways, she was nice, but she did tell her little fibs here and there. Other than that, I really didn't know much about her. And she had dialysis every Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday. And on those same days at 5:45, the same driver would come. It was like routine. Okay. And, this one particular morning, I want to say it was a Tuesday morning because it was the week of Thanksgiving. So Tuesday morning, myself and my two CNAs at that time were changing her. And it was 5:15 in the morning. And just to let you know, our facility allowed visitors 24/7, except after 8 p.m., you had to get buzzed in, and then you had to get let out. So just keep that in mind. So all of a sudden we're changing her, and the door was kind of open a little bit. There weren't shared rooms. They were private rooms, and nobody was up at that time. But we did have the curtain drawn a little bit. And all of a sudden, this little knock is on the door, and this woman who had about shoulder length black hair and peeked around the corner. Now, all I could see was this. Okay. That's all I saw. She, like I said, she had shoulder length black hair. She was kind of olive tone. She might have been like Pakistan and black, or she was mixed with something, but she did speak perfect English. Anyways, I was like, can I help you? And she's like, is this Mrs. So-and-so? And I said, yes. Can I help you? And she says, oh, I just want to remind you that she needs to get ready. She has dialysis soon. Of course, with my smart in the back of my mind, I'm thinking like, no, lady. But I said, okay, yep, we'll have her ready. And then she left. That was the only and last time I saw that lady. Okay. So I kind of found that odd, but the minute I turned back to look at the patient, she did a 360. Her whole demeanor changed. When we woke her up, she was fine. She was in good spirits. She was talking, blah, blah, blah. Sometimes Italian little ladies talk a lot. But all of a sudden she was like, oh my God, maybe I shouldn't go to dialysis. And I said, what do you mean you shouldn't go? You need to go. She goes, but what if they don't know how to get there? What if we get lost? That was a red flag to me, because these drivers are, specifically taking you to the doctor's office or the treatment that you need. They have directions and everything. And I said, no, I'm pretty sure you'll be okay. But she kept talking about it and talking about it. So the gentleman came at his normal time at 5:45. And I just asked him, I said, you don't happen to be training anybody today, do you? And he says, no, why? And I said, I don't know. Some lady came and wanted to remind me that she had dialysis. And I said, I'm not sure why she did that. And I don't know who she is. So they left, and I forgot about it until after shift was over. And I saw the nurse who was working at the station, who was in charge of the, opening and closing the door. And I said, did you happen to open the door earlier around 5:15ish to a lady with short, shoulder length hair? She goes, no, girl. The only one I knew was coming was that man who comes, every time for dialysis. Otherwise, I would have asked you, silly. You're the supervisor. I can't just let anybody in. And she's right about that. So I'm like, and you didn't let nobody out? She goes, no, ma'am. So right then and there, the hair on the back of my neck stood up. I was like, So anyways, so I go home, I go to sleep, and I come back to work, and I don't have that particular set right away. I don't have that till after 11, but I asked that nurse who started at 3, how was she doing today? And she goes, well, she's like, she came back for dialysis. She's been asleep ever since. Mind you, it's like 7:30 at nighttime. And I said, I said, that's odd. So I go about doing my business, and it was about 8:30, and I'm across the hall with my patient, and I hear this scream, like screaming for bloody murder. And it went on for like a couple minutes. And then finally I went directly to her room. I knew where it was coming from. And she was sitting straight up in bed, almost like The Exorcist, right? So she's straight up, eyes like this, screaming. Hey, part 2 of my story. I apologize. I was at work and I had to give a report and go home. I went in. I was able to calm her down. But again, I did not take over that set until 11 o'clock. So 11 o'clock comes around and I get the keys and immediately I go to her room. Now, mind you, she was screaming. She did have a few episodes prior to that. Again, scared, like she was having a nightmare. So I go in, and the first thing that I notice is where she's looking. And she's looking in that left corner with absolute fear in her eye. Now, I'm at the age where curiosity then killed the cat many times, so I'm not curious, and I don't look. I have yet to look. So I don't know what they're looking at. But I also want to remind you before I tell you this next part that she was in no state of passing anytime soon. She was supposed to rehab and go home. So I come back that night. So now we're Wednesday. So now we're Wednesday. I come back Wednesday night and she is on hospice. And she is on morphine and Ativan, a DNR. Pretty much, when they put you on the morphine and the Ativan when you're on hospice, it's just slowly about to be your time. And the entire day, she would not talk. She was scared. She would not move her eyes from that left corner. And then Thursday came, which was Thanksgiving, and she passed away. And the sad part of that is she passed away with her eyes open, looking in the left corner with a tear down her face. So I'm not sure, whatever this lady did in life, whatever happened, they were coming for her. And that this situation was not the first time I've seen Angel of Death, but what freaked me out the most was I spoke to it. And I just can't get over that. It still gives me goosebumps and makes the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I mean, the video, she was never appeared in any of the videos, coming at the door, in or out. Nobody knew who she was. I never saw her again. So, you just never know, but it comes for you. So it's just creepy. Now, however, I do have another story for you after this, but it's totally different. When the Cenas and I got back together, because we didn't work every night together, we had this aha moment, and immediately one of them fell to her knees and started praying, and I never saw her after that. She was a good Cena. So you know what, people, just be good people. Some people believe in demons and devils and some people don't. I will tell you, something comes for you though. I don't know. I don't look.
I was working at a PCU. And what I liked about this PCU is that if you got this back wing, you're kind of by yourself. out there, which was really cool. Because then, I work night shifts, so, it's already less people-y, but if you're in that wing, it's just you and your work and your patients. Most of the time they forget that you're back there. It's great. So I was back there, and it was about maybe 3 a.m, and I see out of the corner of my eye, because there's, its own nurse's station that's back there, and I see out of the corner of my eye that there's a patient that's up and walking around. Nobody likes to see that. So I'm like, oh no, one of my patients is trying to escape. So I follow this patient. I go down the hallway. The only thing at the end of this hallway is a patient's room, which was a hospice patient that was 1,000 years old. And then there was a door that was a very loud door that goes to the escape for fires. I get to the end of this hallway, and it's just me and God at that point. And I'm just looking around trying to find anybody at that point, just anybody. Nope, nobody, just me. There was a definite patient walking. So that was whenever I decided that hospitals are most haunted places ever, because so many people have died, and I don't know if they just can't escape or what, because we can't open our windows. I had a patient's family tell me that one time, that we needed to open the windows to release them. I'm like, I don't want them here either. I want them to also be released, but we can't open the windows because we're on the 7th floor and people like to jump off things.
It's about room 7. 3 of the ICs that I worked in, room 7 was just bad juju. It wasn't room 13. I'm trying to even remember. I don't know. But room 7. I don't know if that's a common thing. If you're a nurse, let me know. Is your room 7 like creepy? My first experience with room 7 was when I was still on orientation. I was learning how to be an ICU nurse, and room 7 had a young mom who ended up going on ECMO, and ultimately she passed away, and it was just not a good experience. And then my next experience was, I had a patient in that room, and every time I would walk in that room, it just felt heavy. It felt not good. Patient was, he was on multiple pressors. I think he was like in his 50s. I can't remember how old he was, but he was to me at the time, he was an older gentleman, and he was dying. We tried to get a hold of his family. His family was estranged, so they didn't want anything to do with him. He was getting worse and worse. We called the family again, and they're like, we don't want anything to do with him. You can let us know when he dies. So usually when people are estranged from a family member, it's usually because of, unfortunately, drugs or alcohol, and that makes them be, a toxic person. This guy wasn't alcohol or drugs. He was actually, he's on the cardiac ICU. He had a heart attack. His heart was failing. He was not doing good. And he looked clean cut. He looked like he was well taken care of. Sometimes, people who have mental illness, they're just been on and off the street, and sometimes that's why they're estranged from their family. This guy just didn't seem to fit. But every time I would go in the room, I just felt like the heaviness of the room. And sometimes that happens because, I just thought that I was dealing with the fact that this man was dying alone. So I was going to hold his hand when he died. So when the time came, family, we weren't, he was a DNR, so we weren't going to resuscitate him. We had maxed him out on all the pressors, but we weren't going to be escalating any further. So time comes when he's passing away. The moment he passes away, the glass shattered. Not even joking, the glass shattered. We had rooms where you could see between the 2 rooms with a curtain, but you have to be able to monitor both patients at one time when you have 2 patients, so there was glass in between, so you could peek at your other patient and check on them. The glass had, it was, reinforced so it wouldn't fall out, but it shattered literally the moment he died. It was that on its own, sent shivers down my spine. But I called his family, and instead of because I had talked to his son multiple times, This time I got a daughter-in-law. It was a female. And she told me she wanted nothing to do with him. Nobody did. He was a horrible human. The glass shattered. Not people can back this story up. But after that, we always would open a window.
So I was an ICU charge nurse for several years. And in the hospital that I worked at, a ICU charge nurse responded to the codes that were called overhead. And one night there was a code that was called overhead, a code blue. Code blue is usually a cardiac arrest or somebody's in respiratory distress, but it's a medical emergency. Code blue was called overhead to the old part of the hospital. So the old part of the hospital was the original portion of the hospital. The rooms were smaller and some of the doors were a little bit different. And the doors in this area of the hospital, the bathrooms, the doors swung in to the bathrooms in each of the patient rooms. So this code was called, a man had gone to the bathroom. He had collapsed in the bathroom, and when he had fallen, he had blocked the door to get into the bathroom. So he was wedged in between the toilet and the door. So we couldn't get in to see what was going on and see what was happening. We could hear him behind the door, and we were doing our best to get in there to assist him. And he was on the cardiac monitor, so we could see that he was in distress. His heart was in distress. We had to eventually get the door off of the hinges, but the way that we had to get extra people in there. Codes that are called on the floor are usually very chaotic. There's always extra people there. And this one had even more because we needed to get that door off of that out of the way so we could get to this man. Ultimately, when we got in there, he was not doing well. He was agonal breathing, and we had to resuscitate him. But when we opened the door, there was blood, there was feces. It was a disaster. He had hit his head, and he had a laceration that was bleeding. Head wounds bleed a lot. So we had to maintain C-spine. So we had somebody maintaining C-spine. Ultimately, we're doing compressions. We're trying to get lines in him. We're trying to get a breathing tube in him. And actually, his family told us to stop because his family saw what was happening, and they told us to stop our resuscitation efforts. But it was a very traumatic event. And anytime you have a traumatic event like that, you have a debriefing. You try and get to the root cause. You try and figure out solutions. Not only the door was a situation, but like what led up to it. And, ultimately, could this have been prevented? So when you debrief, I got to know the nurses from that unit really well. So when I would see them in the cafeteria, I would know them by name, and I could, say, hey, how you doing? And if there's one thing that bonds nurses together, it's trauma. And traumatic events, you get trauma bonded. So these nurses, when I would see them out and about, I would be like, hey, how you doing? And nurses would say, hey, do you remember the door? I'm like, yeah, I remember that traumatic event. And they would be like, we can't keep it closed. And this was not just one nurse. I would see another nurse from that floor, and they'd say, do you remember the door? Yeah, that door will not stay closed. They had tied it. They had propped things against it. They had maintenance come out and look at it over and over and over. They would close it and it would be open. This was a repeated theme. Ever since that event, they could not keep that door closed.
So a little background. I was an ICU nurse, an adult ICU nurse, for just shy of 9 years. And the last couple of years I was in the ICU. It was during COVID. So the way our particular ICU was set up, we had a unit that was the overflow ICU, and we shared half of the unit with the pediatric ICU. Remember that detail. So our COVID ICU turned into about 40 rooms, and there were 70 patients occupying it at a time. It was insane. But on the pediatric ICU side, I took care of this patient a couple times who was very sick. And during COVID, we threw everything at these patients to try to save their life. And this patient, he was on what we call CRRT, which is a continuous dialysis machine that runs for 24 hours a day. And he was also on what we call a rotoprone bed, which turns you upside down so you are facing the floor to help your lungs oxygenate better. So this guy actually ended up surviving. He came off the ventilator, which was a miracle in itself. And with the COVID rooms, every door was shut. And this was like summer of 2020. So at the time, we were extremely cautious. Like getting into the room, we would wear a shield with goggles, with N95, with the simple mask, and we had everything on. And then you would have to shut the door when you would go inside the room. And mind you, there were no visitors that were allowed during this time at all. So on this day, the housekeeper and I are in the room, and the housekeeper is talking to the patient. And these poor housekeepers, they were in the thick of it with us. They watched a lot of patients die with us. So she was particularly like in awe of this guy, because I think I can count on one hand, maybe two, if I'm pushing it, of the amount of patients that I personally remember that survived during COVID. So she's asking him, like, how are you doing? How are you feeling? And he was like, I'm good. I'm really tired. I can't sleep at night. And typically the ICU is a very loud environment, an overstimulating environment. There's a lot of alarms, codes going off, things like that. It's not a place where you're going to sleep and get rest. Okay. So, we're kind of like, oh yeah, I know, I understand. And is there anything we can do to help? And he was like, no, it's just, at night, these kids are running around my room and they're really loud. And the housekeeper was like, oh, okay, all right. And he goes, and there's this like teenage girl, and she's like sitting on the edge of my bed, and she's like texting and giggling all night. Mind you, there's no visitors. Mind you, we're on the pediatric side. That used to be the pediatric side, at least. So I messaged my friend who was the pediatric ICU charge, and they had to move to a different area of the hospital so we could occupy their space. And she's like, whoa, that's pretty trippy. And the weirder part, she said, is the last kiddo that died in there was a 13-year-old girl.
So I worked in a hospital that the unit that I worked on had never been anything but a cardiovascular ICU, or cardiothoracic. It was hearts and lungs and heart transplants, total artificial heart, lung transplants, anything cardiac related. So on this floor, there was a patient that we had one time. There was a particular room that kind of gave you the heebie-jeebies when you walk past it. And we had a patient in that room that he was not a nice human. He was somebody that I had actually known like outside of the hospital, so I never took care of him because it was a conflict of interest. But one night he was confused, so he was just saying kind of mean, hateful things. But one of the things that he kept saying is he kept using a racial slur, the N-word, and he kept saying, "Get that little racial slur out of here. He's playing in here. Get him out of here. I don't want that little racial slur in my room." And everybody, like this man, I didn't like him outside of the hospital and as a patient, and was confused, and it was not good. But anyway, he ended up leaving that room, got better, left. And then when you're in the hospital, you can get confused, and it's very normal for you to hallucinate. You have medications on board. Like, that's just kind of a normal thing. It just kind of, sometimes your true colors show up whenever you are on medications. I've had women punch me that, their family members say like, "Oh, they're so sweet and kind," but then they get on, medications, and then they are, hitting and kicking. And anyway, anesthesia can do that to you, as well as medications, and, even your sodium gets off, there's all sorts of things that can influence you. So we didn't think much of it.
I think it was like 2 days later, not just a couple days later, we had the sweetest little old lady in that room. And I did take care of her. She was adorable. I swear I can't remember. She was in her late 80s, but she was so sweet and so cute. Poor lady. But she was not confused. And, she kept telling me, she was like, can you get my purse for me? Give me my purse. I really need my purse. It's over there. And I was like, what do you need your purse for? And a lot of times we don't give patients their belongings because there might be extra pills in there and we got to know what they're taking. So I said, well, let me help you go through your purse. And what is it that you want out of there? She says, I have some candy in there. I really want to get some candy for that little boy. He keeps coming in here and playing, and I have some candy that I'd like to give him. And I said, what, there's no little boy? And she says, yes, there's a little black boy. He keeps playing over there in the drawers and he's looking for some food, but I have some candy and I'd like to give it to him.
This unit had never been a pediatric unit. There was never children. There wasn't any children on the unit and nobody was visiting, especially no children. It's pretty creepy.
I heard before I started working night shift that our hospital was haunted and never believed it. Caught some weird vibes every now and then, but tonight is next level. It is 2:10, and every hour, 2 minutes after the hour, we're hearing a scream. It seems like it's on a timer, but we can't figure out where it's coming from, and we have no logical explanation. Someone please explain this. Watch till the end.
Okay. Should be like a second. Yeah. I'm still gonna freak out.
Make sure to like and subscribe for more chilling mysteries. And until next time, stay safe, stay aware, question everything,